All right, so in this video, I'm going to give you a few tips and tricks, a few insights for achieving an intimate vocal sound. And this is for when you're going for perhaps a Billie Eilish type vocal or a Lana Del Rey type vocal. I could list off a bunch of artists, but I'm sure you have artists that you like or singers you like that their vocal mixes just have this subtlety about it, this almost this dryness, this intimateness, like they're right next to you, like almost whispering in your ear type of quality that we hear sometimes in songs. And that is the type of effect that I want to make sure that you have the capability of doing if that's actually what you want to achieve in a song that you're working on. So what I'm going to show you here is this is my song Scared, and this is under my artist name Azap, A-Z-A-P in all caps, and this is my song Scared, and the original version of the song is a bit more of an ambient song, and I'll probably actually talk about this one when I delve into the ambient tips and tricks. But I picked this one for the intimate one as well, because if we strip away the reverb, then it actually gives us a very nice template or starting point for getting an intimate vocal sound. So here's what it sounds like. Let me come back here so it doesn't start so abruptly.
I don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart, and you come up against them all the time.
So as you can hear, this is a bit of an ambient song. And so what I'm going to do is turn off the reverb. So I have the reverb set up on return tracks over here. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn all of these off. That way we get a nice dry vocal starting point.
Don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart.
So as you can hear there, what we're working with is going to be a good starting point to teach you a few tricks and tips for an intimate vocal effect. So let's come back to the lead vocal here. Now in this particular session, as you can see, we've got, this is the main vocal chorus, this is the main vocal verse, and then these are some additional vocal tracks. Some of these are parallel tracks, but that's not really important for this video because we're mainly just focusing in on the lead vocal. So here again is what we're working with.
Don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart.
Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about here, let's talk for a second about the idea of less is more. Less is more. In intimate vocal mixes, you generally do not need to do very much at all. Sort of the entire point of having an intimate vocal is to have that vocal sound as natural as possible. So we don't want to drench it in a bunch of effects or like reverbs and delays and modulated effects. We want to keep it as natural as possible. And so this is kind of one of those things where we all understand this, right? So we all have met people where they just come off as artificial, as fake, as inauthentic, and we're like, it's just not that enjoyable to spend time with them. It seems like and it feels like they're trying too hard. We've all met those people, right? But isn't it refreshing when you meet somebody and they're just at peace with themselves, they're grounded in themselves, and they don't feel the need to put on a show. They're very comfortable in their own skin, and they're very easy to talk to, and they're very non-defensive. That's the type of person that is enjoyable to hang out with, right? But the weird, you could almost think of this as a paradox, is the person that you like to be with or spend time with is the person who is trying less hard. So it's the person who is being more natural, who isn't trying too hard to gain your attention, or who isn't being too needy. So when you're using plugins, especially if you're going for a particular sound, don't get needy with it, right? Don't throw plugins on that don't need to be thrown on that vocal. What you need to have at front of mind is an aim. You need to understand what is the sound or the quality that I am going for in this particular vocal mix. And if it is an intimate vocal mix, then less is more. You generally do not need much more than, of course, a good vocal take, which go back to modules 1 and 2 to really dial that in. And then EQ, compression, module 4, dial in EQ and compression. And then, of course, you can go through my mix walkthroughs of the indie pop song and the indie rock song here in module 5 to get even more of a dynamic feel and a live almost feel of adding EQ and compression to vocals. So if you just get those right, the vocal take, the EQ, and the compression, you really do not need to add much more to get a good intimate sound. So that's the first thing. This is very important. Less is more. Don't be needy. Don't be that friend who's out there being way too obvious, just not being subtle enough, not being themselves. Instead, be the person who's very comfortable in your skin. It's the same type of thing when it comes to an intimate vocal. Just let it be what it is, because that is where it's actually at its most powerful. All right, that said, there are some things that we can do to subtly spice up an intimate mix, because sometimes it is still a little bit too dry, or it's not quite compelling enough if we just leave it as is after we add some EQ and some compression, maybe a hint of saturation as well. Because here,
I don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart.
the main problem I'm hearing now is there is actually too much high end on this vocal. And I think this is very important that I bring this up here, because if you've watched tutorials for any length of time and you start to pick up on the patterns of how people tend to use EQ specifically, right? So what they'll often do is they'll record in the vocal, and then it seems almost inevitably they'll go in and they'll boost the high end, either using like a Revival plugin by Slate or a simple boost of an EQ to add some high end so it cuts through the mix better, right? And they'll often use that terminology, cut it through the mix, so that the vocal doesn't get lost in the mix. That's all fine and good, but what about when there's a song like this where there's hardly anything going on? The vocal is going to cut through the mix regardless. So then it's a matter of how much high end do you really need? Listen to
I
this.
don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart.
Do you notice how it's a little bit too piercing? It's too bright. So if your vocal kind of sounds a bit like that, where it just doesn't quite have the warmth, then here is a really easy way to warm it up. Pull up a regular EQ and do something like this.
And you come up against them all the time. Wish I could turn the page and let you in my brain. You said you're dying just to get inside, but I don't wanna go there. Wait, I do wanna go there, but I'm scared.
Now, is that a slight overkill? Maybe, but listen to the difference of when we turn this off.
I don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart, and you come up against them all the time.
Doesn't that just sound more intimate? It sounds easier to listen to. It sounds more balanced. And that is because it is more balanced in context. So if there was a bunch of instrumentation, if this was a rock song and there were heavy distorted guitars and loud drums happening, then of course we would need to leave those high frequencies in and maybe even boost the high frequencies. But you have to be very cognizant of what is the overall flavor or the overall context of the mix that you're working with. And then, like water, you want your vocal to just form to it. Think about the way that water works. Water doesn't, build its own structure. Rather, it wraps around and it adapts to the form that it is surrounded with, that it finds itself in. It doesn't get rigid or like, no, every time I record a vocal, I have to boost it at 3K. Like, don't get into those patterns. And this is especially the case where, if you go to listen to an artist like Lana Del Rey, you'll notice this a lot if you really pay attention. There is just a lot of high end rolled off or low end boosted, but she can do that because generally speaking, in a lot of her songs, the instrumentation doesn't have that much to cut through. So it actually sounds better, and it creates a more pleasing tone when you remove some of the high frequencies on the vocal. And I think this is an example of that. I think it simply sounds better if we take this EQ off. Let's listen to this one more time. So here's without it.
And you come up against them all the time. Wish I could turn the page and let you in my brain. You said you'll die.
So there you go. That is such an easy trick, but you'd be surprised at how many people just completely overlook this. And I've been that person too, where I would go and reach for just a gazillion different plugins when I had a basic EQ sitting in front of me the whole time that would have given me exactly what I needed. And this is an instance where I truly think that is the case. Adding this EQ really, really makes a big positive difference to this vocal. So next, let's talk about adding a bit of saturation to a vocal like this. Now, unlike what we talked about in the aggressive rock vocal mix trick video, there we went pretty berserk. We just went crazy and we cranked the distortion or the saturation. For this type of intimate style, you want to usually keep it pretty subtle. And this is also another example of know your plugin library, use what you have. So in this case, I could use perhaps UAD's Oxide Tape. So this is a tape emulation, like a tape saturation type of plugin. So listen to what this does.
Where to start? Got walls around my heart, and you come up against them all the time. Wish I could turn the page and let you in my brain. You said you're lying just to get inside, but I don't wanna go there. Wait, I do wanna go there.
So this type of saturation is very subtle. Now you can crank it if you want to, but whenever you're adding these types of tape saturation, these emulations of analog tape from back in the day, it's usually going to be a pretty subtle effect. But for this style, it just works really, really
I
well.
don't know where to start.
Now, because the tape also warms it up a bit, I think I may have overdone the EQ a bit, so I'm just going to ease this back a little
Got
bit.
walls around my heart, and you come up against them all the time. Wish I could turn the page and let you in my brain.
So there's an example of just adding a tiny bit of saturation. In this case, I just used a plugin that I have, and that is the UAD Oxide Tape. And then another way that we could add a tasteful, subtle amount of saturation would be the free plugin, Saturation Knob. Let me save the session before I add it, because it seems like once every 10 times when I add the plugin, it crashes my DAW. Anyway, so here we go.
You said you're dying just to get inside, but I don't wanna
Let me actually turn off the Oxide Tape, and let's pretend that this is the only saturation we're adding.
go there. Wait, I do wanna go there, but I'm scared. Yeah, I'm scared.
Let's come back here.
I don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart.
So again, you want to keep it very subtle when you're adding these types of saturation and distortion effects for this type of intimate sound. But again, if you want a reference for this, go listen to Lana Del Rey stuff. There is a lot of this very tasteful, saturated quality that is being added to her vocals. Her vocals aren't completely dry in the sense of they're recorded in through the microphone and then they don't touch them. It's not that dry, but they do achieve a really cool intimate sound, and it's not just by using an EQ, it's also by adding a bit of very tasteful saturation. So that is an example of what you could do. Now, one more plugin that I just have to bring up just because it's such a fun plugin to mess with, and that is, of course, RC20. So if you have RC20 or a plugin that is similar, you can really create interesting effects. So listen to what this does.
And you
Okay, the noise is way too loud, so we need to turn that down.
You come up against them all the time. Wish I could turn the page and let you in my brain. You said you're dying just to get inside, but I don't wanna go there. Wait, I do wanna go there, but I'm scared. Yeah, I'm scared.
Now, As you can hear, first of all, it's just fun. It's cool. It's retro. We got a bit of vinyl, got a bit of tube distortion, a bit of wobble, a bit of the wear and flutter that you would get from recording on an analog console, and all of that awesome stuff. So, do you see what I'm doing here? I am using the plugins that I have, and of course, when I really, really want a plugin, then I go buy it. But I can't tell you the last time I bought a plugin. It's been a while, right? I'm not even sure how long it's been. I don't buy plugins all the time. Over the years, I've really bought the ones that have really appealed to me. But for the most part, you probably have in your DAW a stock plugin like a saturation or distortion plugin that you can use very subtly to make your intimate vocal a bit more glued together and add just a hint of life to it. And that is the role that saturation plays. Keep it tasteful, don't overdo it, but just a little bit of it can go a really long way. All right, and then finally, one more tip that I want to leave you with is what about if the vocal, it sounds good, it sounds intimate, sounds dry. What if it sounds almost too dry? Like, I need to add a little bit of space. Well, I want to give you two ways that you can solve that problem. So,
got walls around my heart.
let me turn, so we have that EQ on. I'm going to turn maybe the oxide tape. I really like the way that sounds.
And you come up against them all the time.
I think the RC20 is a little bit too much in this case, so I like where we're at.
Wish I could turn the page.
But let's say that, and I actually do feel this to an extent. I am like, it's a little bit too dry. We do need a slight amount of ambience. So here's what we can do. Let's come over to our return tracks, and I actually already have the one set up. So let's do this first. This is a dark reverb sound, and we are going to send that vocal to this return track with the dark reverb on it. Now, these are very specific settings here. There is a pre-delay, and then there is an extremely filtered out sound on this reverb. So we'll come back to this. Let's actually come over to the vocal and let's send it to that dark reverb. That way you can hear what it sounds like.
And let you in my brain. You said you're dying just to get inside.
So it is super subtle, especially as you heard when I turn it down. It's just so far back, and it's completely blanketed because of the filter on that reverb, the high cut. So if we come back to this reverb,
I don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart.
right, there's just the normal, right?
Come up against them all the time.
Which could be fine if we were going for a more ambient quality, but we're not. We are going for an intimate quality. And so within that, we're solving a very precise problem of it's a little too intimate. It's a little too dry. We want to add just a little bit of space to it. And so I went for a deep vocal space. It's like a hall type sound. And I just completely filtered out this here.
Wish I could turn the page and let you in my brain. You said you're dying just to...
So it sounds completely underwater, but that is a cool effect. Now, the reason that I specifically like this effect, where you have a hall type reverb with about 2 to 3 seconds of decay time and completely filtered out like this, is it really separates that intimate vocal from the reverb. So it almost sounds, and it really does sound like two different tracks. They don't feel like the same thing at all. They don't really feel layered on top of each other. And the benefit to that is it allows us to retain the intimacy of the vocal, but still have a slight amount of ambience sort of swimming underneath, to stay true to the underwater metaphor. And one more quick thing I'll mention here too is the pre-delay. So the pre-delay can really help to separate a vocal or any track from the reverb signal. So let me put this here so you can kind of hear the difference.
Got walls around my heart.
Versus,
and you come up against them all the time.
Then it becomes actually more of a delay with reverb on it, as you can hear. So it separates, it delays when the reverb actually kicks in. And so yeah, I think I had this close to here around 16 or so. And that kind of helps just to give a slight amount of distinction between the dry vocal and the reverb sound. Okay, so there's one way that you can solve the problem of my vocal it sounds good, it's nice and filtered out. I cut out some EQ, I added a bit of tasteful saturation, but now it sounds a bit too dry. I want to add a slight amount of ambience. So there's one way you can do it. Another way is adding some type of like an ambience or a room type reverb. So let's go for another effects channel here. Let's label this ambience. I can't spell. All right, ambience. And we'll once again just use Valhalla Vintage Verb. And let's just quickly grab ambience. Let's start there. And then I'll come over and send the lead vocal to that ambience on that return track. So now it could sound like this.
Don't know where to start. Got walls around my heart, and you come up against them all the time.
Now, that's too obvious. It would have to be more subtle, so we would have to turn it down. I'm going to turn off the dark reverb for now so we can just hone in on this.
Wish I could turn the page and let you in my brain. You said you're dying just to get inside, but I don't wanna go there. Wait, I do wanna go there, but I'm scared.
So again, very, very subtle, going back to how I started this video. Less is more. You do not need to go crazy. Keep everything subtle and don't come off as needy or overbearing, or just don't try to do too much here. And just a hint of ambience can help perhaps elevate the vocal track in the way that you want. And then what you could also do, I just thought of this now, just one more thing you could try is like a slapback delay. I already have a slapback delay set up on a return track here, so I'm going to turn that on. And let's see what that sounds like if we send it to a tiny bit of slap delay.
Up against them all the time. Wish I could turn the page and let you in my brain.
Ooh, I actually think I like that better than the ambience. It gives me a nice sound, especially if you keep the slap delay dry. I know sometimes I'll talk about adding a reverb to the slap delay to add some space to it, but in a vocal like this type of dry slapback sounds pretty dope.
You said you're dying just to get inside.
It's very subtle again.
But I don't wanna go there. Wait, I do wanna go there.
But it doesn't take away too much from the intimacy. Does it make it slightly less intimate? Sure. But there are trade-offs here, because the problem again was, okay, my vocal is too dry. I need to add a little bit of space. So you might sacrifice on the margins one quality for another quality. But at the end of the day, as long as you retain enough intimacy and you make the vocal sound appealing to the listener, then that's all that matters. And again, one more time, let me reiterate the concept that I really love is you want your vocal mixes to be like water. You want them to form to what their environment is. So imagine a water, again, just going over a rock or something. It doesn't create its own form next to the rock. No, it shapes around the right, forms itself to the rock. It's formless in a way. And so there you go. Those are a few tips and tricks for getting an intimate vocal mix. I really hope this was helpful. If you have any questions, or if you think that I didn't explain something correctly, or you just have any comments or questions, be sure to leave a comment below in the comment box below this video, and I will get back to you. All right, thank you for watching. Let's move on to the next video.